Taoiseach, in the last hour we heard of your government's decision to expel a Russian diplomat because of the nerve agent attack in England. I want to say that I absolutely agree with the Taoiseach's statement that the use of chemical weapons in any circumstances is absolutely unacceptable. He's right in that. I also fully understand the need to protect what is called national security. That too is right. The expulsion of Russian diplomats from Ireland operating as intelligence officers is a more than suitable action to be pursued if indeed they are behind the attack in England on Sergei and Yulia Skripal. In fact, regardless of this particular attack, diplomats of any country acting as spies should be expelled from any state or jurisdiction. We do, Taoiseach, however, need to see the evidence underpinning this decision. Simply citing solidarity with Britain isn't sufficient. Such a significant and dramatic Irish foreign policy decision should be dictated by Irish security analysis. In this case, a decision, it seems, has been based on information from a foreign security intelligence service, which is an unprecedented step. Essentially, Taoiseach, you're asking us to trust Boris Johnson, and dare I say, this might not be the wisest course of action. The move, I believe, shows a disregard for Irish military neutrality, and it's completely in line with the efforts of Fine Gael and your government to undermine and dismantle that neutrality. You have pushed for a more militarised EU through your support for PESCO. This, as you know, will see Ireland participating in EU military operations and funding EU military research, which is intended to complement NATO missions and strategic goals. As recently as the beginning of this month, your 4 MEPs published a document which seeks to tear up Ireland's military neutrality. The document proposes giving your government the power to deploy Irish troops as part of military missions which do not have UN approval. And this would eventually see Irish resources deployed at the behest of NATO. The principles of neutrality and independence have always been at the centre of Irish foreign policy, and Irish people overwhelmingly support the continuation of this policy, and it's your job as Taoiseach to defend and reinforce that neutrality. We can't allow decisions for government to be based on an assessment by British intelligence who, let's face it, do not have a good track record when it comes to Ireland. So I want to know, Taoiseach, if you intend meeting with the representatives of political parties in the Dáil to offer a full and frank explanation as to what has led to this dramatic shift in policy.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. At last week's European Council meeting, EU leaders unanimously agreed with the United Kingdom government's assessment that the Russian Federation is highly likely to have been responsible for the attack in Salisbury on the 4th of March, and that there's no plausible alternative explanation. We affirm that all EU member states stand in unqualified solidarity with the United Kingdom in the face of this grave challenge to their security, or rather our shared security. The use of chemical weapons, including the use of toxic chemicals as weapons by anyone, anywhere, is particularly loathsome and reprehensible. And the attack in Salisbury was not just an attack on the United Kingdom, but an affront to the international rules-based order on which we all depend for our security and well-being. In light of the conclusions of the European Council and following an assessment conducted by our security services, Defence Force Intelligence, Guard Intelligence, and the Department, in consultation with the Department of Taoiseach and Department of Foreign Affairs, the Taoiseach briefed the government this morning on our intended course of action. The Sec-Gen of the Department of Foreign Affairs has met with the Russian ambassador and informed him that the accreditation of a named member of his staff with diplomatic status is to be terminated, in line with the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. The individual questioned is now requested to leave the state. This is, Count Corla, very much an act of solidarity with the United Kingdom. I want to say that Ireland as a country has no quarrel with the Russian people, who we respect, and many of whom live here. And this is, let's not forget, a dark and difficult time for the Russian people, who are mourning following the death of more than 60 people, including 40 children in a shopping centre in a fire that for us reminds us of the great Stardust tragedy, and I want to extend our deepest condolences to the Russian people on their loss. As I mentioned, in terms of evidence, the decision was based the decision was made in solidarity with the UK, but the decision on which person to ask to leave was based on intelligence and advice from Guard Intelligence and Defence Forces Intelligence. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, at his request, briefed the spokesperson for the major opposition party already, and is willing to convene a briefing for party leaders and party spokespeople today, if that would be helpful. We're happy to do that. In relation to our neutrality, Ireland is a neutral country. We do not join military alliances. We will not be joining NATO. We will not be part of a European army. However, when it comes to terrorism, assassinations and the use of chemical weapons and cyber terrorism, we are not neutral one bit. And we are joined, of course, in expelling diplomats with other countries that are also neutral, including Finland and Sweden, who have taken the same course of action as us.
Thank you, Count Gordo. Can I just suggest to you, Taoiseach, on such a major development as this, I don't think it's sufficient that you selectively brief your colleagues in Féin. This story, not least the attack itself, and of course the abhorrence of anybody in any set of circumstances using chemical weapons, has caused unease and disquiet. I don't think there is anybody who would argue but that the state and government have to take action where there is a prima facie case, where there is absolute concrete evidence that a diplomat or diplomats must be expelled or an embassy punished from any such action. But the story in the public ether is that this is a matter of solidarity with the UK, and that alone. I asked you if you would brief leaders of the parties in this House. I'm taking it from your response that you will. But I have to put it to you, Taoiseach, and you should acknowledge that your position on military neutrality and an independent Irish foreign policy is threadbare. The actions of your 4 MEPs recently have served to reinforce that fact, that you do not care a whit for that policy. And to repeat, and you might explain as to who it was on the Fianna Fáil bench that was briefed, and why it was, or why it is, that Fianna Fáil enjoys such selective treatment.
As I mentioned earlier, the Taoiseach will be happy to brief spokespeople or party leaders. You're welcome to send your spokesperson or attend yourself if you wish. I'll be here for the next few hours, then I'll be back in Cabinet, and then I have an Article 28 meeting with the President, so it's just not possible for me to do it today, but the Taoiseach is available to do that. In relation to... I apologize, I've forgotten the second part of the question. Under the constant supply agreement, there's a provision on no surprises, and we thought it appropriate that this should not be there should not be a surprise. There's no such agreement with Sinn Féin in that regard. But I would point out as well, when this was done by other countries, and when this was done in the past, it was done without even a government decision. It was done simply as a decision of the Foreign Minister at the time. But we took the decision not to make our decision at the same time as other European countries yesterday afternoon. 14 European countries acted yesterday afternoon because we thought it was appropriate to brief Cabinet and have Cabinet be informed of that decision this morning. And that was done. But as I say, we're happy to provide a briefing to party leaders or spokespeople today.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy